Welcome to our JavaScript web course. In this video, we will cover the math and number object. The date object will be covered in the next video. The math object is a predefined JavaScript object. It contains many methods to perform complex mathematical calculations. Some of these are square root, sine, cosine, power. In this course, we will not be using these methods. We will focus on methods that perform simple mathematical calculations, such as rounding up or down a number and generating a random number. The seal method of the math object. Please note the syntax. Math is capital M. JavaScript is case sensitive. In order to access the methods of the math object, you need to invoke the math object. The seal method will round up to the next closest integer. So here we have an example, num equals 5.45, and if we were to use the seal method and pass that variable which holds that value to this method, it would return 6 because it would round up to the next closest integer. An integer is a whole number. We also have the floor method. The floor method of the math object does just the opposite. It rounds down to the next closest integer. So here we have our variable num set to 5.45, and if we pass that value to the floor method, it would round down and return 5. We also have the round method of the math object, and this method will round up or down depending on which is closer. So here I have num1 equals 5.5, and if I were to pass that value to the round method, it would round up and return 6 because that is the starting point of the next highest integer. However, if I were to set the value of 5.49 to the variable, it would round down. We have the random method of the math object, which we have worked with. So now we will cover exactly how this works. The random method generates a decimal value between 0 and up to 1. It will include 0 but not 1. So if we were to just execute the random method of the math object and store that in a variable, this is an example of what you would get. You would get a very long decimal. So how do we generate a whole number using this? Well, to begin with, if you multiply by a number, and in my example I have 5, it will return a decimal between 0 and up to 5. However, this is still a decimal. Now we want to turn it into a whole number. So if we were to use the floor method, we can convert that expression into a whole number. Notice we are passing the expression math.random times 5 as an argument to the floor method. Because the floor method rounds down, it will generate a whole number between 0 and 4, including both 0 and 4. So therefore we have a 5-number range. If we wanted to include the number 1, then we would use the seal method because seal will round up. So here we can generate a number between 1 to 5. The ability to generate a random number can be very useful. We have the Parseint function. This is a global function. It means it's not tied into any JavaScript object. The definition of the parseint function is that it parses a string and returns the first integer. It is not used to parse a number. It is not used to round a number. Let me point that out. We have just covered the methods that are used to work with numbers. Because JavaScript is a loosely typed language, there may be occasions where you need to parse a string that may look like a number so that it can be used as a number. Here I have x equals 123.567, and if I were to use x as an argument to this function, it would return 123. Let's take a look at the next example. Here I have y equals 123 space 567. If I were to parse that, it would return 123. It returns the first integer it finds. Let's continue. Supposing x equals 10xxx. Now this is definitely a string. If I were to parse that, it would return 10. Now let's look at y equals xxx10. If we were to try to parse that, it would return nan, which stands for not a number. Let's look at the last example, z equals xxx. If we were to parse that, it would return nan, not a number. So this is valuable in detecting whether it is a true number or not. We also have parse float. The difference is that it will return a floating decimal value. A decimal value is often referred to as a float. However, if we have a space, it will only return the first number. There is a lesson here regarding the use of parseint, and it has to do with form data. By default, a text box returns a string, regardless if it is type equals number, type equals email, type equals URL. Text boxes return text. Therefore, if you wanted to work with some numeric values that come out of a text box, do not use parseint to turn them into a number. As we have just seen, faulty data can be converted to a number. You have two options. The first option is using type equals number. This technically still returns a string. It is still a text box. However, the user is forced to enter a number. Therefore, you know it's a number, and if you want to parse it at that point, you may, because you know that the characters are indeed numbers. The second option is to test that it is a valid number before parsing. That is done using the isNotANumber function. It will return true or false. And here is an example of type equals number where it will automatically tell the user that they have to enter a valid number. The number object is a predefined JavaScript object also. And a number object is automatically created when you define a number. Therefore, you can access the methods and property immediately. You do not need to use any other object. There are additional methods and properties of the number object. However, I would like to focus on a few. The toString method, which converts the number into a string. There might be times when you need to do that, and this is how you would do it. I would also like to cover the toFixed method. This formats the number. So if you want to format a number to a specific number of decimal places, you don't use parse float. You use toFixed. Technically, the formatting changes it into a string. Therefore, you would always do the formatting at the very end after you have performed the calculations. We also have the NotANumber property, which we have already seen. So here is an example using the toFixed method. Here I have num equals 5.456789. And if I wanted to format that to a decimal value with 2 decimal places, I pass 2 to the toFix method, and the result will be 5.45. This is the preferred way to format number, not using round or ceil or parsing. Again, the formatting should be done at the very end, after all the calculations have been performed. Once you apply this method to a number, it is a string, and you can no longer perform calculations. We also have is not a number, NaN. Notice the syntax. This is another global function, and it is used to test whether a value is indeed a number or not according to JavaScript. And here is a list of the different values that it can test and whether it will return true or false. This is another way of testing data coming in, especially from a text box, to see whether it is a valid number or not.